Okay, well, thank you all very much, and welcome to the last session for our Finis Terrae conference. Actually, before we begin, I'll do this again at the end, obviously, but we owe a big debt of gratitude, I think, to Ander and especially to Elena for putting this together. I think initiatives of this kind require energy, and old lags, we just don't have the energy. So it has been a fantastic thing to see. So thank you very much, and hope this lives long and prospers. So the setup that we have for this afternoon, we have three experts in different things, I think, but experts also in the same thing. We have Alejandro García Sanjuán, who you will have seen in the previous session. We also have Damian Smith, who is in, I assume you're in St. Louis. You are... No,
I just arrived back in England on Wednesday to visit my parents. I would have liked to come over, but it didn't seem very polite to arrive and then leave immediately.
Well, we have Damian, Damian Smith jetting in from Chelmsford then, and we have Antonella Liuzzo Scorpo, who I'm guessing is in Lincoln, but perhaps not. Oh, there we go. I managed to get that one right. So what we are going to do is I will do just a few words by way of introduction, and maybe drawing together a few of the threads which have arisen over the last 2 days, and just put out some general questions. And then the three important people here should feel free just to ignore that completely and to talk about whatever it is that you think is the future of medieval Iberian studies, which is the general theme. Just maybe by way of sketching one approach to this, two things I think have occurred to me in particular. One is to do with terminology, which came up this morning on the subject of merinos and merindades, but it also came up in Alejandro's talk earlier on the very question of reconquest, the terms that we use to talk about things. The title of our session today is The Future of Medieval Iberian Studies. There are many underlying presuppositions in that, I think, and maybe those things perhaps can give rise to a fruitful discussion, even down to what do we mean by Iberian, or indeed the future. Yeah, I'm not even going to go there. We can think in that case of languages, Iberian languages. What does that mean? There is, of course, a long-standing debate about, and it entered into partially what Alejandro was talking about earlier on, about what is considered authentically Spanish, and there's another controversial term, what is European, whether an Arabic speaker in what was then Al-Andalus is European. We can also consider what it is that we conceive of as the period. We can think of Iberia as a function of Europe, of the Mediterranean, of a global Middle Ages, and in some senses as Iberia being, what would you say, doubly seen as peripheral in the European world, but also seen as peripheral in that transcontinental Arabic-speaking world, which was, after all, by far the more important part of the globe by comparison to what was a very peripheral Europe at the time. We can consider Iberia in those contexts, and perhaps that might give rise to quite fruitful exchanges or fruitful ways of thinking of things. What does medieval Iberia mean? I think in the past, it probably meant something different if your disciplinary background was history or if it was philology. But there are other disciplinary backgrounds as well. So bringing those different perspectives to bear on what it is we think we are talking about when we say medieval Iberia might be one way to look forward. The other thing that I thought was something which we have to take into account in the future of medieval Iberian studies, and again, it partially comes from something that Alejandro was saying earlier on, and in a comparison that William made between the image that you had of Sevilla on the 23rd of November and Charlottesville. in 2017. We cannot pretend that race or white supremacy is not an issue in medieval studies. It may mean something different. Early modern race may mean something different, but nonetheless, the way we have come to think of these things is, as is the case of the term reconquest in its own right, the way we think of these things has a layering over the centuries. So we cannot speak of medieval race or racial issues without thinking, by stripping away our own backgrounds about who we are. Perhaps pre-modern studies can take a step away from engaging in some of the rather vitriolic debates that are taking place right now. And perhaps Iberia is a quite good space in which to do that. The non-hegemonic European cultures, perhaps that might, and a non-hegemonic European space might be quite a good way of being able to reconceive of some of the issues which we have in front of us here. You probably will know the approaches to these things, I think, on different sides of the Atlantic have been quite different. It is a hyper-characterization to say that, I don't know, North American scholars of medieval Iberia follow a kind of, what would you say, Americo Castro type of route, whereas in Spain, the view is that there's entirely traditional forms of scholarship, and we don't talk about things in Arabic, and that's kind of a different area. But of course, Alejandro's presence here contrasts with that view. I'm not going to pursue this any longer, just to say that however much you might like to regard, forgive the trope, Spain is different, there is well, anyone who's read Sarah Pearce's skewering of Darío Fernández Morera's myth of the Andalusian paradise, I can see you wincing from here right now, will know that some of those discussions are taking place. One of the other things that struck me about Alejandro's talk earlier on was skirting around, not quite skirting around, skewering the far right perspectives on medieval past. I can't help thinking if we are not sometimes too easily led into North American considerations of what far rightness is, and if maybe there are more appropriate parallels to the past and to racial supremacy in, say, Eastern Europe, in, say, what is happening in Hungary as a parallel to the kind of politics which Vox espouses. But anyway, now I am very far away from the future of medieval Iberia, so I am going to pause. I realize actually, well, we have a running order in the program, and each of the contributors was just asked to say a few words. So Antonella, if you don't mind beginning, maybe we can see where we get to with that.
Sure, thank you. Can you hear me?
What am I doing?
Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can. I've been given a piece of paper to introduce you with, but I suspect, shall we just go ahead? And I think we probably all know each other, and I've spoken far too long anyway, so perhaps you would just like to go ahead.
Okay. Well, first of all, thank you very much to Elena and to the organizers for inviting me today. I'm really sorry not to be there in person, but I was teaching until 6 p.m. last night and doing stuff this morning in Lincoln. So I'm sorry, but I look forward to meeting you in person soon, or seeing you again in person soon. So when I was asked to talk about this, I thought, oh, this is going to be easy. And then I started thinking about everything that I could have mentioned today. And I was like, this is not a 3-hour lecture. So I think I'm going to focus on 3 perhaps main points, which I'm sure will generate more questions. And it's something that already has been touched upon. And I think it builds quite nicely actually on also what Alejandro discussed earlier on in his talk. And I want to say also that I guess my perspective, as you will see, is that of someone who clearly works within Iberian studies in the UK. So it would be actually really interesting then to see also how not just different disciplinary perspectives, but the kind of academic background that we might have grown up within might inform such kind of views. So my first point, I would like to start with actually thinking about decoloniality, which, as you know, is certainly not a new debate, but the decolonizing agenda has become very prominent and finally institutionally supported, I would say, in the past few years, at least within the UK and the Anglophone higher education sector. And by redesigning our curricula, so starting from diversifying our bibliographies as the first step towards then a more critical engagement with the kind of overall decolonizing journey, we are also kind of reassessing not just the contents of what we research and what we teach, but also the ways in which we do it and the ways in which we learn and we understand history, trying to include a broader and a greater representation of non-central or non-canonical voices, especially when it comes to non-European, non-Western, non-white thinkers, and so on, to achieve a better historical awareness of the context in which scholarly knowledge really has been produced, but also to really question by whom such hierarchies of knowledge have been shaped. And this encourages, as we know, kind of thinking more broadly about the ways in which we understand the past, but also really how we do it from different disciplinary perspectives and intellectual traditions. So the colonizing really means challenging established frameworks and approaches to enable this richer understanding and really exploring and challenging the coloniality of knowledge. Now, medieval, and as we know, the label itself, by the way, medieval is a Western-centric periodization, so there would be something else to discuss there, but anyway. But I think Iberian studies are, as Aengus was suggesting, really perfectly placed to address these questions, as this offers an excellent opportunity to lead by examples this process of decentering, diversifying these frameworks and questioning this kind of idea even of periphery, as it was mentioned before. But how do we move away, or at least how do we challenge actually such frameworks or such hierarchical approaches to knowledge? And here comes my second point, which I wanted to mention, and is about transcultural and transregional approaches, which I think is a move forward the comparative approaches that we might have seen within Iberian studies already. And actually, medieval Iberian studies, but also Mediterranean studies have done, I think, quite a great job in kind of this direction and moving beyond strict geographical or national boundaries as categories of historical analysis. However, I think that we really need to push those boundaries further and break a little bit more with historiographical, but also disciplinary boundaries within Iberian study itself. So again, a step beyond comparative and really approaching the transcultural in a more kind of holistic way. But I think we need to try to break some of those boundaries within the humanities, which, as we know, by the way, some of those disciplinary boundaries are 19th century colonial constructions per se. And also, and this is a side note, and I know we are recorded, but I'm going to say this anyway, because as you know, especially in the UK and not only, the humanities are under threat. So it's actually by joining our forces together that we can move forward in different ways. But the challenges in this case are very often our own institutional boundaries, and the job market sometimes dictates such boundaries. As we know, when there's a job advertisement that is for a specific discipline or an area within that, and how do we pitch ourselves for that? So on the one hand, there is this call for more interdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary work, but on the other, there are this kind of limitation on the other side. And in some cases, there are also individual skills. So the recognition that we actually might need more languages than we do actually have to do a certain type of transcultural work. and so on, without even mentioning, and there's a bit paradox and something we can discuss later if you like, the big question of, on the one hand, we tend to criticize the fact that the Anglophone historiography dominates a little bit of everything. But then on the other hand, if you don't publish in English, you know that that research doesn't get the same kind of exposure, if you like, than if you publish in other languages. And this is an issue in itself. So the way of overcoming, I think, some of these challenges, and here comes my third point, which I guess is nothing new, but something in which I generally believe, is the need for more collaborative projects and how they're really the way forward to advance knowledge, to embrace diverse methodologies and approaches, and to explore and problematize, not just, in our case, the complex relationships and dynamics in a context such as pre-modern and medieval Iberia, but also our own perspectives and to question our own interpretative paradigms and where are they coming from, really. So even the same fact that very often we consider Iberia historiographically at the crossroad between and within Mediterranean studies and medieval studies. And again, when we say medieval study, what do we mean? Mostly means Western Europe. But again, kind of forgetting that these contexts are actually interconnected. So we have all done, I guess, in our research, the big job of trying to challenge Iberian exceptionalism. But I do wonder whether actually the next step, the next job for us is to challenge this multiple exceptionalism, and how do we bring them in dialogue and that conversation kind of moving forward together. Now, as was mentioned before in the introduction to this session, I think in a world that, as we know, is threatened by misinformation, misreading, misuse of the past to serve especially national and nationalistic agenda, and unfortunately the Middle Ages have featured prominently in such discourses, I think we have a duty as scholars, whether we are historians, literary scholars, philologists, etc., to raise awareness of all these issues within and beyond academia. So it's not a call necessarily for all of us to become public historians, but certainly not to remain constrained within a circle that is certainly a fruitful one and a useful one to develop this conversation, but how do we bring them out there? So how we define, so back to the point, I swear I didn't talk to Aengus before, but we seem to kind of mention the same thing, but how we define and we position ourselves and our research, I think really matter. How we define Iberian studies and using interconnected cultural, political, and historical parameters also really matters. And so if we cannot change the rules of the research game institutionally, and here I'm referring, at least from the perspective of the United Kingdom, research excellence exercises where you have to publish in a certain category to be submitted, or you apply to research funding in a certain kind of way, or the language in which you write really matters. If we can't necessarily change that, what we can surely try to change is how we engage and how we critically engage with a process of critical self-reflection, self-development, and how we reposition our scholarship within the broadest academic and public context. So on the one hand, again, research collaboration really matter, and I think they've been actually facilitated even more by the booming of any kind of form of digital platforms, especially in the past 2 years, although they were already there. But what really matters to break with these boundaries, I think, is how we translate all this in what we teach and how we teach. So more Iberia and in its plurality, in its diversity, we have on the curriculum, and more we can prompt new questions about why does it matter? Why does it matter now? And this, I think, will generate new avenues of inquiry, new also academic development, and overall a more nuanced understanding of the past and of past and present ways of creating shaping and interpreting knowledge. So these are my considerations, and I hope that will just be good starting points for chatting a little bit more about all this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Antonella. We really didn't speak beforehand, but I think it says something that we have similar preoccupations or similar ideas about where we're at, although yours are rather more articulate than mine. If we can move on briefly then to Damian Smith, who is still with us, who is from University of St. Louis, although is currently in Essex. Damian, I will keep the introductions down to a minimum if you'd like to take the floor.
Oh yes, thank you very much, Angus. Yes, I'm a professor of medieval history at St. Louis University, which is in Missouri, in the center of the United States. But I did my doctorate at the University of Birmingham. That was one of the best decisions I think I ever made, because then as now the history department of University of Birmingham is quite outstanding. Now, my own studies center on medieval Europe in the 12th and 13th century, often the relations between the papacy and the Iberian Peninsula, and especially the reign of James I of Aragon, who you've already heard about. He didn't quite get to a platinum jubilee, but he reigned 63 years. It was the longest reign in medieval history. And he also provided an account of his reign, very unusual among medieval kings. So when Elena so kindly invited me to speak here, I was very keen to say something, because of course it is at my own university. So but I'm also conscious I've been rather disconnected by the pandemic, and I may not be up to date with all that is going on. It may be because I've been disconnected from reality that my answer to her question was overwhelmingly positive feelings, that when she asked about the future, my response was a very positive one. That is from my point of view, that in the United States, that so many of the leading medievalists are people who have an interest, and many of them are primary interests in the history of the Iberian Peninsula. And we see so many superb historians studying Spain and Portugal. And for me, it seems, for the history of the Crown of Aragon, this almost seems something like a golden age of scholarship. And so I don't wish to mention individuals, but it's certainly the case that there are a great many fine scholars. And then I'm even more positive still, and this is shameless publicizing, but the university where I'm at has given the go-ahead for a center for Iberian historical studies, because we have many historians of the Iberian Peninsula, both there and at the campus that we have in Madrid. So we were also very fortunate in that the great medievalist Teo Ruiz was kind enough to donate to us his library and his microfilm collection. And we're going to have, as well as annual lectures, regular lectures through the year on Iberian history, focused on the medieval and the early modern. And then from my own point of view, I think during the last 6 years, we've had 4 doctoral students completing doctorates in aspects of medieval Iberian history, and three of those now already have permanent jobs. The 4th one has only just finished, and so from my point of view, things are extraordinarily positive, and also now I think of just as I've discovered, particularly during the last 2 years, the amount that is available to us online for research, then the number of archival sources that now exist online is a wonderful thing. One has a pang of regret sometimes that some things are online and one no longer has an excuse or as much of an excuse to be in particular archives, but nevertheless for the next generation it means they will have so much more readily available so many things to deepen the level of research. All of my initial thoughts were very positive. There seems this vibrancy when one thinks of the journals like the Journal of Medieval Iberian Studies. One sees this great wonderful range of topics and new ideas. Of course, it wasn't long before some melancholy set in. The American ideal is the pursuit of happiness. It's not the actual acquisition of it. So I couldn't stay too happy for long. I'm conscious of the number of great historians that have passed away in recent years. And I'm also conscious of the younger scholars that, although of course they are just as talented in every way, that they have these great challenges now facing them. Yeah, as Antonella was saying, of how to survive in this very difficult climate, this very difficult market. And then, of course, there is this additional question, this cause for some anxiety concerning where the global Middle Ages will lead us. In that, I should probably explain that in the United States, a good number of universities, it's quite normal for us to teach world history and to teach world history to all of the students at the university. I've done that for a long time. It's something I really enjoy doing. The fact that all of the university students, whether they become doctors or lawyers or work in business, will be doing history courses. I feel that this helps to hopefully give them a greater understanding of the world and to deepen their humanity. I'm very much in favor of this, but where is the global Middle Ages, which was sort of something I feel born out of desperation of medievalists trying to survive and expand. Where will that lead us, and where will it place the Iberian Peninsula? Of course, not at the center, because nowhere is at the center. But does it work to the advantage of Iberian studies because of the connections, obvious connections to the wider world? Is it something which is going to develop to be the norm? I mean, I noticed already, I think in England or in Scotland, jobs being advertised as the global Middle Ages, with it being specific that they weren't to do with Europe. I think that was the case. So I'm a little concerned of how this will develop. And then, of course, my other thoughts once I was going in this more anxious direction was the general situation for the humanities. Certainly, the great desire of administrators to push all the young people into STEM, whether their talents are in that direction or not, and this forgetfulness that it's the humanities which bring us humanity. I had great hope for great cause for hope and optimism, but also some anxieties as well.
Thank you very much, Damian. So our third speaker, would require no introduction, but we've already had an introduction. So I'll just say our third speaker would require no introduction. So it's Alejandro García Sanjuán from the Universidad de Huelva. I don't know if you can be heard from over there, but
yes.
So I will move out of your way.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm basically in agreement with Antonella and Damian in many of the things that they said, and many things were coming to my mind when I was hearing them. I think following up a little bit on what I said in my previous talk, there are some challenges that we need to face, and I think definitely the issue of essentialisms and nationalisms, this is an issue, but this is perhaps a tough one, because it involves questions of politics and ideology, but the increasing number of politic medievalisms makes, I think, rather unavoidable that we as academics need to perhaps get a little bit more involved in public conversations. And yeah, that perhaps requires a bit of personal commitment, not only with your own discipline, but also with your own community, with your own society. And I can understand that many scholars, many colleagues, sometimes they rather stay out of the fray. That's normal, I think. But sometimes I feel it's a bit daunting when you see people somehow getting away of public conversations, because we as academics, I think, well, it makes me wonder what is our role as academics in society. In Spain, in particular, we are civil servants. We all work, most of us work for public institutions, and we get paid from the state. So that makes me wonder, what is our role in society? And especially if we try to get away from public conversations. So I think this is part, me personally, I feel that this is part of my job. So this is one challenge, I think, nowadays, especially because, as I said, because of the increasing number of references to the medieval past in many ways, very different contexts. And this is something going on not only in one country or in one place, but pretty much in an international context. Then there is another issue, I think, and this maybe affects more the Spanish Academy, because in Spain we've had a traditionally a very strict boundaries, scholarly boundaries. So we had on the one side the Arabists, and on the other hand the historian medievalists. So what we are witnessing right now is that in the field of Arabic studies, less people is interested in the medieval past, in the Iberian medieval past, while on the contrary, on the side of medieval studies, there is more people getting involved in studying not only the Christian Iberian history, but also the Islamic Iberian history. So, but still the problem is that we have this separation, and the fact that we are, let's say, losing the Arabists for the cause of Al-Andalus, I think this is a serious problem, because we historians usually don't get a full education in Arabic. So for us in the Spanish academic system, it's difficult to get a good education in Arabic. For example, in Huelva, we don't have Arabic at all. So I think this is a problem, because what medieval Iberia was obviously a very complex historical reality. So we need people with very different backgrounds in order to being able to study a very complex historical reality. So we need people knowing Latin, we need people knowing Arabic, we need people being able to carry out archaeological studies. And this is very difficult to achieve because of these strict academic boundaries. So I think this is a big challenge at the present moment, because it's difficult for the young people to get the background that is required to being able to reflect the complexity of medieval Iberia. And I'm thinking, for example, of the late Pierre Guichard, who was a model as a scholar in this regard, because he was a medievalist, but he likewise was able to read in Arabic, and he was an archaeologist. And he was, to my mind, he's the real founder of modern Al-Andalus studies, because he brought a completely new approach to Al-Andalus and to medieval Iberia. So that's what I think, that's another challenge that we have. We need people with these, young people with this diverse and transdisciplinary academic background. And I think that's it for the moment.
Okay, thank you very much. I think there's lots of room for discussions. Anybody, either on Zoom or in the room?
And so we have a comment by Simon Robinday saying that following up Damian's observation, maybe we need to start collaborating much more with STEM people, for example, biology, bioarchaeology, in order to maintain this high disciplinary profile.
Simon, I notice, is there. I mean, feel free if you want to unmute and add to that.
Well, good morning, everyone. No pressure here then. Good morning where I am. Good afternoon where you are. No, I mean, you know, to follow up on Damian's observation, I think that many of us in the US, at least, and I'm not sure whether this is also true in the UK, do feel very conscious of the institutional weight being placed behind STEM. And I think that we may have no alternative but to go with that flow. You know, a lot of really fascinating work, which I only very partially understand, is being done by our bioarchaeologists. And, you know, of course, one might think of Count Jarman's work on the Vikings, but there's also great work being done by bioarchaeologists in Galicia, for example. And I just would suggest that maybe the next generation needs to become more scientifically literate than I am, and that this might be another path forward in the coming decades. That's really just my thought for the morning.
On that note, I think that's totally, I mean, I totally agree with that, but I think that goes into what Alejandro was saying. It's really hard to get educated in other things that are not the discipline you chose in your first year of university. You make a decision when you're 18 years old, and apparently that's going to define all your career. As Alejandro mentioned, in Huelva, we didn't have either Arabic or any other medieval languages at all. And then you get to the job market, and they tell you need to be super interdisciplinary. You need to know to be able to do all these things in order to succeed in this competitive world. And it's like, where do I get the skills? And I think there is a problem of we're not getting the skills we want to get. Because funding and as Alejandro mentioned, I think those strict boundaries are being a huge burden on our discipline.
That's a good problem. I mean, you never have all the skills.
Oh no, definitely. But for example, it's really hard to say, well, now I want to become, for example, want to get interested in digital humanities. It's really little that you can do to get the training. I mean, there are ways, but it's hard to step in. It's really hard to get the necessary initial skills that you need to get into that field because of how the education system is planned. Unless you do like numerous masters and another.
Well, according to them, nobody will ever be qualified for any job. So.
I'm just thinking in my head, do you not think that it maybe slightly detrimental to the whole, studies of the humanities to put even more of an emphasis for the next generation on STEM? Because in my personal opinion, as someone who studies modern languages here, I'm not saying that is anyone's fault, but I see the lack of representation. And I think as well as a member of, as a Muslim person growing up, both my parents are immigrants. And I am the first in my family to study modern languages, something like so unheard of. So many, second generation immigrants, because there's always this massive push on STEM. Go and do maths, go and study chemistry, go and do something like this. And so I was kind of like the non-starter in my family. I was the first person who got up and actually said, Mom, I know you really wanted me to do law, and you really wanted me to be a doctor, but I really like Iberian history, and I really love studying languages, and I decided to study Russian, Spanish, and German, as well as, you know, growing up as a child. I went to Arabic school 5 times a week, every single day after school, and I think as well that, you know, encouraging people like me to come and join this department, we offer an insight that isn't normally given, because I have this whole religious perspective that I always bring to conversations within seminars, which I think is lacking a lot. In most of my classes, I'm very conscious of the fact that I'm one of very few people of color there, and we bring a very important insight. And I think by, you know, having this, you know, and even more of an emphasis on the next generation to go into STEM, or to have these, you know, this bigger interest in STEM can actually have more consequences, and perhaps push people like me away from studying humanities. And I think people like me bring a really
couldn't agree with you more. Yeah, and that's also a part about broadening the discipline, or decolonizing the discipline as well. I suppose, sorry to speak for you, Simon, I suppose Simon was saying one way of guaranteeing the ongoing good health of the humanities is to tie it more closely to to STEM practices or whatever. But you actually think quite the opposite. You think we need to be more self-confident about the humanityness of what it is.
I mean, if you have an interest in something, you should pursue it as far as you can. And I don't think that, you know, no, I mean, I'm not trying to be any kind of, you know, rudeness to Simon. You know, sorry, Simon, I don't mean to be rude. I'm just saying that I think if you have a passion, then you should pursue it 100%, regardless of what anyone thinks. If anyone thinks, oh, we should be, you know, studying this a little bit more, just let people study what they want. And you keep telling them what they should, and you know what they should potentially do this instead. I think you can have more consequences. Personally, in my opinion. It feels good to disagree, guys, but I don't know. This is my opinion.
I completely agree. I believe if we are positioning ourselves as people that study humanities, we're already positioning ourselves underneath people that study sciences, then we just think of ourselves as lower, second level.
It involves this whole inferiority complex of studying humanity.
Right. So get trapped within the errors that come within STEM itself. Because some of the disciplinary elements, so some of the economists getting hold of medieval statistics, trying to create a modern economics theory based view of the Middle Ages, it becomes horrendously wrong, because they're trapped in their own disciplinary structures. They cannot think outside the box. So okay, we can add acquiring the STEM skills to all the other skills we need, and then correct them, tell them where they're going wrong. But I mean, I think that's actually making it even more difficult.
Do you think we should tell STEM people to take more humanities books?
Right, if I jump in here, because I think my sense is the way to square this circle comes back to Antonella's point about the importance of collaboration. And it's not so much that I think Simon's right that we should be more open to conversation with our colleagues in STEM disciplines and vice versa. I don't necessarily think that means we all need to become bioarchaeologists. We just need to have a bioarchaeologist on speed dial, and that's if the thing we can learn from STEM is the principle of team, collaborative working, where different people bring different things to the table and different types of expertise, and different types of experience. That I think is where we can be at our strongest.
We have hands raised.
Hands up all over.
We have Maeve, we have Antonella, we have everybody.
We'll come back in that order. I know there's some comments in the chat as well. So I don't know, Simon, you had your hand up a second ago. Did you want to come back on that?
Yes, just very, very briefly to say that it was precisely the principle of collaboration which I had in mind. I'm not suggesting that everyone needs to become a bioarchaeologist overnight. I certainly won't be. But, you know, I just think that conversations with people who we don't normally converse with should be productive, you know, in the same way that, of course, medieval Iberian studies has often been divided between, you know, let's say Christendom and Al-Andalus. You know, I think that the great cultural gulf between the sciences and the humanities, which is a gulf that emerges in the British school system at a very early stage, is one that we should try to bridge. And of course, we should remain confident about our contributions as scholars in the humanities. And we should correct those poor benighted souls in the STEM disciplines who don't get it, but vice versa. You know, I think there's a lot to be learned from each other.
Just following this from Fiona, actually, I think this is a really good example. Digital humanities is necessarily collaborative and already increasingly is included STEM collaborations. So I think it's a really good example of how things can work.
No, absolutely, but that means not selling our souls, I suppose. Exactly. So it's the collaborative point, isn't it? There is something else as well, actually, and refers to something that Antonella mentioned beforehand, was we should also be allowed to fail. Yeah. Because the collaborations, the point of collaboration is to come up with something in the end, but you cannot guarantee the ultimate success of it. So I think those collaborations must also give rise to the possibility of failure, but without fear, perhaps. Anyway, I'm going to stop ranting. Maeve, I think you wanted to add something.
I just wanted to thank you so much. I'm a postdoc, early career in a major interdisciplinary project, and Iberian art historian. And so I think I feel funny because I feel like I'm the one that people are talking about a lot when you're talking about people who are in the job market, doing collaborative work. And I sent this a little bit in the message, but it's just so funny because things have happened so quickly with Iberian studies. When I was in New York with Cynthia Hahn for my master's, not that many years ago, you know, she didn't know anything about Iberian medieval art. You know, she didn't know anyone I could study with, you know, and so really at that time, this was not even 10 years ago, you know, the people who were teaching this stuff were really the only ones doing it. As the same with my PI now, Emma Hornby, you know, she was a long time the only one doing, you know, or one of very few doing early medieval Iberian music. Whilst now all of a sudden, only within, like I said, it feels like less than 10 years, for me to get a job, I have to be the best doing it, not the only one, which was just like a second ago. You could be the only one doing it and get a job. And now all of a sudden I have to be the best one doing it and to get a job. And so with this Iberian studies, I feel like it's all of a sudden asking a lot, you know, for me to, when I was coming up, you know, not even having one medieval Iberian class I could take in undergrad at all, you know, to now having to learn Arabic on the top of the fact that I work with 4 different languages as it is. Much more than many of my other medievalists in other fields that do English, you know, studies. I'm constantly working with 4 languages all the time. And now I'm being asked to be an archaeologist, an Islamicist, without even having the income to, you know, make it to the end of the month or the stability for next year, you know. So I just wanted to put that out there. And the other tricky thing with these interdisciplinary projects, and this is again from a perspective early career person, I don't really slot myself into any department easily. I'm not in the school that is the school with my discipline. I'm in the music department because that's the interdisciplinary nature of my project. My PI is a musicologist. I'm not even, not to mention not in the department of art history. I'm not even in the school of art history. And publishing is difficult, you know, because I publish now very historical articles whilst I'm an art historian. So again, I have to sort of navigate which journals I'm going to pitch to, and whether or not the art historians on the hiring board later are going to look at me as an art historian. So I'm just painting a picture of like this rosy, like interdisciplinary, like, it's hard work, but I love it. But, just giving more details on what that looks like on the day-to-day on the ground, So thank you.
You need to come here, Maeve. Our departments of languages, art history and music are in the same school. So
I'm buying a ticket right now.
But
Hold my spot.
I think in all seriousness, what you say about disciplinary boundaries, and this was something which Alejandro and I think Antonella mentioned earlier on, those are real. Those are real. Our silos are real, and they make it very difficult to work collaboratively. Maybe it's a money question as much as anything else. I think Antonella also has a hand up.
I just wondered if it's just if there's something special about Iberianism, about the rush for us to have solved all the problems of the humanities. When I think really one of the biggest problems with our discipline is the documents. And that's what makes us need to do so much at once, is because the documents are so hard to find, they are, they have gaps, and so that's all. Thank you very much.
I wonder, actually, just in following up on that, I'm going to abuse my position by answering slightly, is if part of the reason for that is not that everything wasn't done in the 19th century. We don't have a vast collection of documents which are edited beautifully and worked on, and the last word was already said in 1895 or whenever we think of the kind of the monuments of Western European scholarship and I mentioned the date 1975, not go any further than that, but the fact that things began to happen in Spain in a different way after that, and that was already in a very non-19th century moment. That's the best euphemism that I can think of. I wonder if that's part of the reason why Iberian studies is a test case as much as anything else, a different way. Unfortunate for you, as you say, you have to know everything, but on the other hand, maybe that is a lead-in to that always being the way in future, or perhaps better still, just having the right people around us when we collaborate. Antonella, I think you had your hand up there as well.
Thank you. So a couple of points. One is actually a point that has been raised also in the chat by Nick Paul, and it's about actually not just collaborations, but who do we include in those collaborations, and whether that is sometimes dictated by some of those institutional boundaries that we were talking about. Because I was thinking, for example, even when you talk about, okay, this is a project, let's say it's history focused, but even within that, how can we actually do it without including archivists, librarians, independent researchers that might be expert in something we are not, and yet when it comes to putting a bid forward, sometimes we're prevented from the system to be able to include actually people who have that range of expertise. So I think there's a big conversation that to be perhaps to consider. But also I was thinking in terms of Iberian studies, and when we were talking, well, actually you started this, Angus, by saying what is Iberian studies? And on the one hand, you're absolutely right, is that I think about Iberian studies and I think about a mix of things together, really, and mix of languages. You can do, as Alejandro was saying, how can you actually say Iberian studies without thinking Arabist and historians of medieval studies together? But then at the same time, and I think that comes down to, well, I'm certainly part of that group of people who, on the one hand, says I do medieval Iberian studies, but on the other, if you actually drill it down, I can say I'm very familiar with Castile Leon and now Aragon, but then Al-Andalus is not my area of expertise. So I think it's also about, acknowledging, as we were saying, the limits of what we can do, but also being aware of what else is there in the field that we can tap into. And so back to the idea of collaborations being essential, and sometimes those collaborations perhaps can be I don't know how to frame this, but there should be kind of beyond, okay, the needs of, I need to put a research project together, but actually on a daily basis. I think we are, again, used and pushed into single author publications, which is great. But now that I actually want to write my next book on decolonizing emotions, I know I can't do it by myself because I don't have that range of expertise. So I want to co-author a book, and I know ref-wise in Iberian context, that's not going to be as excellent as a single author book, but I think that actually to advance knowledge in that direction, that's the only way I can do it. So I think it's a very difficult balance there between what we are requested from the system in which we work, we teach, we are embedded in, where the discipline is moving, but perhaps also that kind of ethical perspective of what do we think is fair and is right to do and what we should do. I don't have an answer, I just have the question to pose there.
But just to add to what you said about, well, that will not be recognized as something as excellent. Well, maybe it will, but it certainly won't until we do it. But that's like asking people to walk very slowly in the direction of the nearest machine guns, please, and hope for the best. So, Nico, so did we have questions from the chat or?
Not now.
Okay. Sorry, Antonella. Yeah.
Okay. So may I speak as my former me from 7 years ago when I was finishing my degree in art history in the University of the Basque Country. I feel I was very frustrated because all our degree was very close. It was like this 19th century box where only you can study art history. And actually with Bologna, with the change in the Spanish university with the new plan, European plan, it was even closer than the former plan. No? So we couldn't take courses from history. So we were doing in the same year, no? So I didn't meet him until a fieldwork research in Navarra. So, for example, I wanted to learn about reading paleography to read medieval documents. But as an art historian in my degree, I only could study iconography and style. Basically, I was acting iconography and style, and maybe they have the same feeling, no? Yeah. Elena and Maria. This is maybe something from Spanish academia. Yeah. I feel like, of course, in English-speaking academia, this doesn't happen. But maybe, maybe, I don't know. It's more open. Of course, it's much more open, I think.
I tried to get Latin for medieval history in my whole PhD, and I had to study on my own.
Yeah.
So I think it's a similar problem, but that's what I was saying before. At least we need minimum very skills to read a document. Yeah. So the discussion that we are having is fantastic, but how we make it possible, how we drive all these different fields into just one thing. And I was thinking, well, I think that maybe we need a degree, a grade on medieval Iberian studies, a separate one, not like inside history or just a separate one. No? It would be interesting that a university will offer just a degree on medieval Iberian studies. Because otherwise, I see it very complicated to drive all these different fields, scientific, humanistic, into and to teach to undergrads, especially all these different fields.
Simone, I see you have your hand up, but just give me a moment because there's a question or comment also from the room. Robert.
What we're largely talking about is Anglophone Iberian studies. So would a degree in Iberian studies in the Basque University be the same as a degree in Iberian studies in Seville? Would a degree in Iberian studies in a Spanish university in general be the same as a degree in Iberian studies in England, when quite possibly the student doing it will have to start learning Spanish from back? And if it's medieval Iberian studies, will they then have to learn medieval Spanish as well? The multiplication of skills at postgraduate level is nothing like as difficult as actually getting the basic skills at undergraduate level.
But it's like even when you get to postgraduate level, it's not as easy to get that training. There is, for example, University of England, there is a paleography workshop for early modern period, and that's it.
Well,
And if you're a medievalist, well, you're a medievalist.
To some extent, though, this is me being an antique, but I was brought up in the days when if you were doing a third year special subject, you were expected to have the language or get it up. The stuff that doing research was if you had there's a gap, you know you've got and you're aware of that, you have to fill it yourself. It's your responsibility to acquire it, not somebody else's obligation to give it to you. And I think that's a distinction that's important. That if we are committed, we will do it. Or we will find an alternative version which allows us that it makes that skill unnecessary. That might mean we have an unsatisfactory or an unsatisfying experience of doing it, but on the other hand, we are doing it. And there are limits to what you can actually do. There are limits to, you can be as idealistic as you want, but reality somewhere always gets in the way. And you have to recognize the realistic.
Alejandro, I think had a follow-up as well.
Yes, just one very little thing. My personal experience, I studied medieval history at the University of Seville in the late 1980s and the early 1990s. No one single teacher back then was a specialist in Islamic history. Nowadays, more than 30 years later, the situation is exactly the same. It's exactly the same. And we're talking about a history department of medieval studies, which is in one city, that most of its medieval history is Islamic until 1248. So you have 500 years of Islamic history, and then you have 250 years of medieval Catholic or Castilian history. So the imbalance, I think it's rather visible. So this is just a glimpse of how slow things change, at least in Spain.
That's what we need to take experiences of, for example, what she was saying. Until we don't see more Muslim people in these classes, we're not going to see those people progressing in the academic career, and we're not going to see them teaching those classes.
I would love to teach this, honestly. Right now as well, if I had to take class right now, I would love teaching Islamic history. It's something I've spent my whole life learning about. As a child growing up, you know, I wish I saw more people like me within these spaces. I would encourage my own children, you know, not pushing any of my interests or anything, but something like it's something that's out of the box, something you know, not out of the ordinary for people like me. I would 100% support because I see more people like me.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's an institutional, but also an academic responsibility to make sure that these are spaces for you. That's part of a decolonizing agenda. I think it's part of the recognition of privilege and part of the recognition of unrecognized power structures, I suppose. Equality and equity are not the same thing. And so, thank you very much for that. Simona has been waiting. So did you want to say something else? Or, no. Simona has been waiting patiently with the hand up there. So sorry, Simona, but would you like to?
Yeah. Can you guys hear me?
We can, yeah.
Okay, perfect. Right. I did have a little comment in terms of how we pursue history and how we think it's a different discipline to everything else. But I essentially believe in everything being connected. So I wanted to ask the experts, if you know, Alejandro as well. So do you believe that being able to study history from a scientific point of view or from a very technical point of view is possible? Because essentially everything is connected, and being able to read a manuscript from a solely literary point of view, you can incorporate, you know, like, for example, in the last 20 years, the revolution of technology, being able to read a manuscript on a computer screen or, you know, on a Kindle or on a phone has completely changed the mental progress of how you read a historic manuscript or a historic piece of work. So do you think that the reason why everything is so separated is because we haven't recognized that yet, that everything essentially is connected in this sense, that you could incorporate technology, science, and other elements of other disciplines and collaborate essentially? So I am basically talking about Simon's point again. So the collaboration point of view. So could we really study history from all different facets? So could it be like a multifaceted discipline, if that makes sense?
Yeah, tough question. I think in Spain we have a very clear and strong ideological prejudice because traditionally medieval Spanish historians turned a blind eye over the Islamic period. That was the job of the Arabists. So they never had the intention of incorporating the Islamic perspective to the field. So this is basically, I think, an ideological prejudice that little by little we are trying to overcome, but which is still hampering much of the study of medieval Iberia, at least in Spain. Okay, because as I said this morning, medieval Spanish studies have been very much shaped by the idea of reconquista. So this is an element that we cannot, avoid or disregard. This is a very influential issue, which still we have to try to recognize and to deal with, in the sense of, as Antonella said, decolonizing medieval Iberian history, because the colonizing approach indeed comes only not from medieval studies, but likewise from Arabic studies, because we have the notion of Muslim Spain, which is actually a very colonial approach to the history of Al-Andalus. And Muslim Spain is basically the work of Spanish Arabists in trying to get their discipline in the 19th century academic order in Spain, which was clearly strongly nationalist.
Yeah.
So,
sorry, so if you do you think that if we do blur these lines out, will it be easier for us, of like, students of this generation, to be able to interpret and understand the Iberian history in a more objective and a more neutral way? Yeah.
As long as these ideological prejudices can be overcome, I think we could have much more objective and complete approach to medieval Iberian history. But there's still a long way, I think, in order to overcome these ideological prejudices in Spain, because these ideological prejudices nowadays are increasing, are gaining traction in many sectors. So
would you have any advice for us?
We need to see what is coming up in Spain right now.
So to keep up with the trends and to, That's it for me. Thank you very much for your answer.
Thank you.
Check also, you have another answer in the chat.
Yeah, I did see that. Yeah, I do agree. I do agree with Simon.
I can't see that. Can you tell people in the room what that is?
Yes. To respond to Simona's question, that was Simon's. I'm mixing all Simon's and Simon's. This comes from Simon's. To respond to Simona's question, I think of history as being pretty omnivorous as a discipline. It has in varying degrees of sort of economics, sociology, anthropology, etc. Not to mention engaging with literary studies. But it has not properly got to grips with science, I think, and I play very guilty. We need to keep opening up these channels.
I have comments, but I've spoken enough already, so Yeah.
It's just that actually. Higher education, but I do. Specifically in those primary and secondary education settings. And I say this because, like, I don't know about everyone else, but certainly for me, I found it actually extremely limiting and frustrating. And it's very much kind of this idea of you take history, you take English, and go to the bit to do maths and history and English. And you know, you're expected at the age of 16, 17 to be making decisions and narrowing down your educational horizons at an extremely young age. You have to actually engage with just intellectual philosophy, which I have to say, coming to university is one of the best things that you can do that. But I just feel like that maybe is actually the issue here, is that, you know, our educational mindsets are established.
Can you speak up a little bit? They can't quite hear you.
Our educational mindsets are established from such a young age, and I know it is idealistic kind of idea of education, but it does go back to, you know, as young as 7 years old. You're there and like, oh well, that's how the feudal pyramid works, and this is how the feudal economy works. You have underlying assumptions. We learn about the Tudors, but we don't learn about the others. That's honestly, I think the last few days was the most I've ever learned about this topic. And I just wonder, in lieu of collaboration and learning from our colleagues and our peers, it's useful to actually take a step back just from this higher education setting. And then, sorry, am I really quiet?
I think the microphone from the audience is a little bit low, but there is no way to turn it up.
Sorry, I'm really aggressive about this. But I just wonder if it's more useful to actually kind of take a step back and examine also the fundamental educational frameworks that we grow up with as children, so we can access languages. We have impressed upon us the importance of learning languages, the importance of, you know, the STEM subjects, but not just looking at them within the context of, you know, the mitochondria is the hub of the cell. Yeah, exactly. You know, actually kind of looking at it as a sense of, we're learning not to pass exams and tick boxes, but we're learning to expand our own intellect and interests, which, I don't know, I just feel like that might be a useful approach potentially. I have no idea how you would do it, but I don't know if people think that.
I'm going to, for the benefit of the people who might have missed the beginning of that, and forgive me if I'm misrepresenting what you said, but the point was fundamentally about the narrow base of education in specifically in this country, how a more broad-based education would be desirable, but also even in the context of the history curriculum in this country, when at second level, at secondary school, how narrowly focused that is. And God forbid anyone should learn anything about the British Empire as well. Like, that just doesn't enter into, well, my son is doing A-level history at the moment, and it's Russia and the Angevins. That's it. That's what they get in the lower six. So I probably shouldn't say anything about this, should I really? But the questions of coloniality are not really brought to the fore in the establishment of this country, shall we say? So does that represent more or less? What? Well, yeah.
I have to say that about 50 years ago, 45 years ago, I remember interviewing somebody who complained that her curriculum was restricted to the history of medicine. She knew nothing about any history apart from the history of medicine, except perhaps Hitler, which was done 3 times already by them.
Well,
narrowness is inherent in school, any school education. You can't, unless you're going to have 100 teachers in the school and 100 hours of class for every subject every week, you're not going to get there. They just have to be limited.
But in that sense, I think I've taught in both the Spanish secondary school and in British secondary school. I've seen the curriculum in both countries. Not saying that one is better than the other, but there's always a but. I think that the approach that I've seen in British schools, especially in history, it's so narrowing that studies history as a petri dish. You take an event, you study it to the station, you know every single name of every single person involved, but then you don't have a whole historical perspective. Whilst not saying that in Spain, education in history is the best, because it's not. But it is true that when you finish A levels in Spanish, well, the Bachillerato in Spain, you might not know a lot of details about a lot of like very ingrained details, but you're supposed to end up with an overview, a historical overview of the whole history. That provides you with the skills to have a more critical thought later on. And it facilitates so much when you get into university and you start, especially if you're going to study history, it facilitates the way a lot, because you already have at least the little thread that you're going to be putting information in. Better than having like that little thing that you know so much, so well, but you cannot connect with anything else. Well, that's my personal appreciation, but after teaching in both environments.
Yeah, I mean, I think it all happens.
Yeah, so I'm just.
My children went through it a long time ago.
So
I think it was probably changed.
So I see that Antonella has a hand up, but I'm just going to one second, please. There are
a couple of comments.
Would you want to tell everybody the comments that are in the chat, and maybe as we are edging towards the end, maybe we could just ask our three contributors just for final comments, because then Antonella, then you would also have the chance at the end to round up.
But we have one comment that is actually a totally different topic. So if Antonella is going to do this, I think it will make more sense. Maybe it should be some.
Well, go ahead, Antonella.
My comment was a follow-up on what you were saying about secondary, and schooling, the education system, especially in the UK. And I was thinking how perhaps more attention should be devoted not just to the curriculum per se, which we know is quite prescriptive for some year levels, but actually to the teachers. And I'm saying this because we had a very interesting project with some of the teachers in Lincolnshire area, and it was on decolonizing history at school. And it was really interesting to talk to teachers, because what they said is that they want to engage with some of these conversations. And I'm talking about medieval, not just Iberian history, but also British history, and how they felt constrained by not having the language, or feeling uncomfortable, or so they perceive not having the language to do that, and being misunderstood by the children, who would have reported this to the parents, and this would have generated kind of a massive rolling. So I think it's also perhaps worth for us considering what are we doing to engage more actively, not just with the wider audience as public historians, but with those who are doing the great job of then preparing those who are coming to university, where we might then have the chance to do what we have been saying we want to do. And I think that's an important step perhaps for us to consider too.
Thank you for that.
On that note, first comment made, faculty in the University of Bristol's education program is likewise talking to local teachers about the possibility of teaching Islamic Spain in the classroom. So good attempt, good progress. On a different note, Fiona mentions that advances in automatic handwriting character recognition technology, for example, transcribers, are opening up consideration of primary sources and diverse archive document materials, creation of databases, etc. So again, I think that adds to the idea of collaboration that we were mentioning before, and things reinforced. And the other comment we have is a totally different topic, but super interesting. Hello to everyone. This is Morgana. I would like to tell you to have more opportunities for students in Latin America, because the ones that ask me interest in medieval studies for us, it's quite difficult to pursue a PhD in these fields. It is already difficult to study medieval theory in LA, so please be more open to students from other latitudes. And I think that it's something we really need to bear in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. We are edging towards being out of time. So maybe if the three collaborators would just like to say a word or two just to round up where you think we're at the end of that. Maybe we go in reverse order this time. So if we begin with Alejandro, if you have anything to round up with.
Well, I think to be positive, I'd rather say that these meetings are really important to not only to meet all the different people, but to get the impressions of other colleagues working on similar fields, working in similar issues, not completely identical, but still I think it's very useful to get this feedback from other colleagues. That helps very much, I think, to reshape your own thinking about how you get involved in the work you are doing. So for me, I think one conclusion is we need much more meetings of this kind in order to get even more and more in touch, and that's, I think, a good way to hone our own skills and to a little bit to reshape the way in which we look at our own disciplines.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And it says a lot as well that the reason we're here is down to two early career researchers who did all the organizing. Exactly. Damian, do you?
Well, to one of the questions which was asked by, I think, Simona, then I think when you are studying history, you try to make yourself at least an amateur in an incredible range of topics. And should we collaborate more with the sciences? Yes, of course, of course. And if you are trying to understand the medieval mind and the memory, how the mind works, then it's right that you will consult a neuroscientist with all the arguments and developments that they have at the moment. I wasn't making any objection to STEM or to scientific studies, but rather to the trend to push people into STEM whose talents didn't lie there, and then really to treat them as second class when they didn't succeed in STEM. My impression, I haven't been able to hear clearly everything that was said, but the energy of the conversation, the quality of the talks that I have heard, the general quality of the studies that I now read suggests to me that the situation is really quite healthy in some ways, but that, as Alejandro and Antonella have both said, these occasions for discussion, for a greater coordination in our studies and collaboration would be welcome to all of us. Thank you very much for organizing this.
Thank you, Damian. Antonella?
So, thank you again, everyone. Really, this roundtable has been particularly useful, I think. So, in terms of last comments, I think the only thing I want to say is that I want to go back to Damian's first comment, and it was the positive thinking, and actually what all the good that is already happening in the field, but also and apologize for the politically driven comment, but in a current situation, at least in the UK, where they're pushing towards insularity and how different, how separate things should be if they're not. I think it's actually important to remember the historical and methodological interconnectedness of our field, broader interpreted field of studies, and use that as a model and as a framework for what we study, but perhaps for what we do in our daily lives. So it's sorry if this sounds like preaching rather than anything, but I think what we can do with Iberian study can go beyond Iberian studies.
Absolutely, I think it can, yeah. Thank you very much for that. I am going to ask for a round of applause shortly, but not just yet. So just hold on a second. Do we need a message from the sponsors? No, you're the Shaq paid for it.
Everybody here go at home, hopefully you can. First of all, just thank you so much again to everybody for coming in person. Thank you to those of you who are online. It's been really good to hear some voices and see some faces that I've not heard and seen for quite some time. I'm glad you're in Essex, Damian. And just thanks so much to everybody for your contributions. It's been such an enjoyable and energizing 2 days. If we can persuade Elena and Ander to bottle the magic that they've had today, then maybe we can do something like this again. I'd certainly be all for it. So final thanks to all our speakers, to Aengus, to Alejandro, and especially to Elena and Ander. Maybe we can give them a big round of applause.
Don't switch off just yet, because Elena is going to say the final word.
That's a lot of pressure. Well, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you, Damian. Thank you, Antonella. What have you do? I don't know why I'm looking at both sides for 1 second. I thought they were in each side of my head, but it's not true. They're in front of me. But thank you for collaborating in this conference. I think the first day when we sat down one day in between two of my classes, Ander and I, we sat down in one room in Ashley, and we started drafting this program that literally, I don't know if it was too much coffee that day, but this was supposed to be just a workshop. This was supposed to be just a workshop for undergraduate students, and we got a little bit too ambitious. Because I think that's the magic of doctoral placements networking at the end of the day, is you start meeting people from other places, you start seeing what their gaps are, you start seeing what the problems are. And I think that with what Aengus said before, with the energy that we are supposed to have, I don't know if I have that anymore, but with that energy, we are trying to find solutions, and at least to raise the conversation, because if we don't talk about this, no one is going to solve it for us. And as we said before, yeah, we need to collaborate with science, but science should collaborate with us too. Because at the end of the day, yeah, science gives answers to a lot of things in humanity, but humanities gives a sense to why we're here, how we came here, and we need to have a bilateral relationship. It cannot be just ourselves submitting to the methodologies of science. Science could learn something from us. Why not? But thank you to everyone, people coming in person, people at home, and I really hope next year or whenever it is, we can have another conversation like this. And thank you.